Have you ever seen a man walking silently through the misty streets of a sleepy Montana town, shadowed closely by 7 German shepherds, each step perfectly synchronized, as if their hearts beat as one? What secrets could bind them so closely? Love or fear? If stories like these touch your heart, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share this video, because together we can discover the truth behind every silent bond. Sometimes, all it takes is a little kindness to bring hidden stories into the light. The quiet town of Clearwater, nestled gently among the foothills of Montana, awoke each morning beneath a soft veil of mist. Its streets, lined with modest homes and friendly faces, held within them a rhythm as steady and comforting as a heartbeat. Yet, amidst this comforting familiarity, a single figure had begun to stand apart, quietly drawing curious eyes and whispered questions. Thomas Miller was a solitary man, nearing 50, whose rugged features and graying beard spoke quietly of a life hardened by experiences he chose never to share. His tall, broad frame still hinted at the soldier he'd once been, though now softened by age and careful solitude. His steel-gray eyes often looked beyond rather than directly at you, not out of rudeness, but as though they were caught gazing at something distant, something he alone could see. The residents of Clearwater knew little more about Thomas than that he had moved to the town several months prior, carrying few belongings but accompanied by a striking group of 7 German shepherd dogs. These dogs quickly became the talk of the town. Each morning, just as the sun spilled its first golden light over Clearwater, Thomas would emerge from his small, tidy cabin on the edge of town, and behind him followed his remarkable companions. The dogs, a striking sight to behold, moved in perfect formation, their powerful bodies lean and agile, their sleek fur a mixture of deep sable, rich black, and soft tan. At their lead walked Max, the oldest at 6 years, with a noble head held high, his dark eyes alert and calm, radiating a confidence that was gentle yet unyielding. Beside him moved Shadow, slightly younger, with intense amber eyes that never seemed to rest. Behind these two were Scout, Duke, Luna, Ranger, and Bear, each with their distinct character, yet each utterly devoted to Thomas. What baffled the townspeople wasn't merely the dogs' disciplined demeanor, but the mysterious way they moved freely without leashes, responding seamlessly to the subtle commands Thomas gave, with mere glances or whispered words. Children would pause their games, and adults their morning errands, all watching in quiet awe as Thomas and his dogs passed silently down Clearwater's main street. Yet, whenever anyone tried to approach or strike up conversation, Thomas gently but firmly declined, his quiet nod accompanied by an expression suggesting an apology he could never quite articulate. This reticence soon gave rise to whispers and speculation. At the Clearwater Cafe, over steaming cups of coffee, men and women spoke in low, conspiratorial voices, wondering aloud about the enigmatic stranger among them. Some admired Thomas for the discipline and dignity his dogs displayed, believing it was simply the result of an extraordinary gift for training. Others, however, couldn't help but suspect something darker, questioning whether the loyalty of the dogs had been earned through harsh or questionable means. Among those quietly concerned was Margaret Evans, Clearwater's gentle but vigilant veterinarian, a slender woman in her mid-40s whose warm brown eyes held an earnest sincerity. Margaret had dedicated her life to the well-being of animals, her empathetic heart drawn immediately to any creature in need. Watching Thomas from afar, she couldn't help but notice the subtle, nearly invisible scars across his hands and neck, remnants of old injuries perhaps from long-ago battles, visible only to those who looked closely. But Margaret also noticed the profound gentleness in Thomas's handling of his dogs, a softness that belied the hardness others imagined. One misty autumn morning, as Thomas quietly passed her clinic, Margaret finally found the courage to speak. Her voice was gentle, almost hesitant. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Your dogs, they truly are remarkable. It's obvious how much they trust you." Thomas paused briefly, turning slowly to meet her eyes. For a moment, Margaret saw something deeply vulnerable there, as though a veil had briefly lifted. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly, his voice deep yet surprisingly gentle. He hesitated, eyes briefly searching hers before nodding politely and moving on. Margaret watched him go, a renewed sense of curiosity and compassion stirring in her heart. In the days that followed, the townspeople continued their whispered questions, their quiet speculations growing more intense. Thomas remained largely unapproachable, but Margaret's simple gesture had started to subtly change something in the air of Clearwater. Behind the silent questions now lingered something new, a desire to understand, perhaps even to reach out. And deep inside his quiet, guarded heart, Thomas felt the faintest stirring of a feeling he'd nearly forgotten, the fragile hope of belonging somewhere again. Days rolled quietly through Clearwater, each sunrise greeting the town in serene silence. Yet behind closed doors, whispers had become louder, steadily forming into uneasy murmurs. The gentle mystery surrounding Thomas Miller and his 7 German shepherds had slowly morphed into a growing suspicion that stirred uncomfortably within the community. Though some believed Thomas simply possessed extraordinary skill, others began suggesting darker, more troubling explanations. At the heart of this doubt was a woman named Linda Harris, a retired schoolteacher in her early 60s, known for her generous heart, but also for her relentless pursuit of justice, at least what she believed justice to be. Petite and energetic, with short silver curls framing piercing green eyes, Linda had spent years championing various causes around town. Her concerns about animal welfare ran particularly deep, and seeing Thomas's unusually disciplined dogs triggered an instinctive sense of alarm. She struggled to reconcile the calm obedience of the animals with anything other than rigorous discipline, suspecting something hidden behind their unwavering loyalty. Determined to uncover the truth, Linda found an unlikely ally in Jim Cooper, Clearwater's longtime mail carrier. Jim, a burly man in his mid-40s with thick sandy hair and a weathered face etched by years of delivering letters in Montana's harsh winters, had an easygoing nature but was fiercely protective of his community. His route regularly took him past Thomas's modest, secluded cabin, nestled discreetly on the outskirts of town. Jim had initially admired Thomas and his dogs from afar, but Linda's relentless questions planted seeds of uncertainty in his heart. He began noticing things he'd previously overlooked: the dog's quiet discipline, Thomas's apparent isolation, and the guardedness with which the man interacted with the world. One chilly afternoon, as the sky overhead turned a heavy shade of gray, Linda and Jim met quietly near the town's central park. They spoke softly, each voice cautious yet determined, their breath forming delicate clouds in the crisp air. They agreed to keep an eye on Thomas's cabin from a respectful distance, carefully observing his routines for any signs of harshness or mistreatment. Neither took joy in their suspicions. Rather, each carried a sincere yet misguided hope of protecting the animals they believed might be at risk. Meanwhile, Thomas remained unaware of the suspicion building around him. His days continued as usual, quietly spent in companionship with his beloved dogs, led by Max, whose steady presence brought Thomas peace. Max, the dignified German shepherd with a striking black and tan coat and thoughtful eyes, had become Thomas's unwavering anchor through many sleepless nights. At 6 years old, Max possessed a calm authority over the younger dogs: Shadow, Scout, Duke, Luna, Ranger, and Bear, guiding them not with aggression but through quiet dignity. Thomas knew well the pain and fear that harsh methods could inflict. Having seen too much of it overseas, he swore never to let his dogs feel such anguish. Instead, his strength lay in patience and consistency, qualities forged through painful lessons and deep compassion. Yet, appearances were powerful, and a gap often lay between truth and perception. As evenings drew in earlier, shadows lengthened, and every subtle action Thomas made was interpreted through the lens of suspicion by those quietly watching him from afar. Linda meticulously noted each detail, the way Thomas sometimes raised his voice sharply, not realizing it was merely to catch the attention of young, energetic Bear, whose playful distraction could break the dog's otherwise flawless formation. Jim, too, observed cautiously, uncertainly, torn between doubt and his instinctive admiration for the quiet strength Thomas displayed. As weeks passed, Linda's determination grew. One evening, As twilight bathed Clearwater in muted hues of amber and violet, she approached Margaret Evans, the gentle veterinarian whose cautious admiration for Thomas had become known around town. Linda's eyes were sharp with concern as she spoke carefully, yet her voice carried an urgency that Margaret could not ignore. "You've seen how those dogs behave, Margaret. Animals don't act that way naturally. There's something he's doing that we can't see." Linda insisted quietly, clutching Margaret's arm gently yet firmly. Margaret listened carefully, recognizing Linda's sincerity but also sensing her desperation to find something wrong. Margaret, driven by her compassion and experience, promised only to observe carefully and fairly. But privately, she feared where these suspicions might lead and the damage they might cause, even unintentionally, to an innocent man and the dogs he clearly loved. That evening, after their conversation, Margaret stood quietly outside her small clinic. The sky above now, a deep navy blue, stars emerging gently in the growing darkness. Across town, the soft glow from Thomas's cabin windows promised warmth and companionship. Margaret wondered quietly if Thomas was aware of the doubts creeping ever closer. She hoped that, somehow, truth and compassion would prevail before suspicion harmed the fragile peace he had struggled so deeply to build. Winter settled quietly upon Clearwater, blanketing the town with a gentle covering of snow that muffled even the most persistent whispers of suspicion. Within the warmth of his small cabin, Thomas Miller sat in silence, the soft crackle of burning logs echoing gently against the cabin walls. Beside him lay Max, his loyal 6-year-old German shepherd, eyes half closed in quiet vigilance, the firelight reflecting softly off his black and tan coat. It was nights like these, peaceful yet heavy with memories, that Thomas felt most keenly the quiet bond he and his companions shared, an understanding built from shared scars, invisible yet permanent. Thomas reached gently to stroke Max's thick fur, feeling the gentle rise and fall of his companion's breath beneath his palm. Slowly, memories crept forward, like silent shadows stretching from corners he rarely visited, yet never truly left behind. Years ago, Thomas had stood beneath a different sky, hotter, darker, streaked with uncertainty. Iraq had left its mark on him, not only in the physical wounds hidden beneath layers of clothing, but in deeper scars etched upon his soul. In those days, Sergeant Thomas Miller had served proudly, respected for his bravery, steady leadership, and deep compassion that had earned him trust from both soldiers and animals alike. Max had been at his side even then, younger, strong, a courageous military dog whose keen senses had saved countless lives, including Thomas's own. On patrols through hostile territories, Max would walk ahead, alert for hidden dangers, his sensitive nose detecting threats invisible to human senses. Thomas relied on Max, and Max, in return, found security in the steadiness of his handler's presence. Yet, war had ways of shattering even the strongest bonds, leaving wounds too profound for medicine or stitches to heal. A mission gone tragically wrong, one sweltering night had left Thomas gravely injured, the pain of his shattered leg overshadowed only by the deeper agony of watching friends fall, their lives extinguished instantly, beyond his reach or help. Max, injured himself, had stood protectively by Thomas, growling at anyone who approached until medics gently coaxed him aside, recognizing the fierce loyalty and profound grief within the brave dog's eyes. The months following that terrible night had been a haze of hospitals and physical therapy, Thomas's body slowly mending while his mind remained trapped in memories he could neither escape nor share. Discharged from service and sent home, Thomas had returned to America feeling profoundly lost. It was during this dark, uncertain time that he heard of military dogs being retired, dogs like Max, no longer deemed fit for active duty, their futures uncertain. Driven by gratitude and longing, Thomas had worked tirelessly to reunite with Max and several others. Shadow, the ever-watchful protector, Scout and Duke, brothers bonded by shared experiences of fear and bravery. Luna, gentle yet fearless. Ranger, cautious but fiercely loyal. And Bear, the youngest, whose exuberant energy often masked deeper anxieties. These German shepherds, all between 4 and 6 years old. Each bore their own scars, their soulful eyes reflecting trauma, mirroring Thomas's own. Thomas had brought them home, determined to give them the peace and safety they had earned, knowing that in helping them heal, he might find his own path toward acceptance. In the quiet cabin, Thomas softly whispered their names, each one carrying memories he could never fully voice. Shadow, alert and protective, reminded him of the comrade who had shielded him from harm at his own expense. Duke and Scout, inseparable and intuitive, mirrored the unbreakable bond between brothers lost to battle. Luna, calm and steadfast, echoed the steady nurse who had soothed his panic during painful treatments. Ranger and Bear, young and uncertain, represented the fragile hope for the future Thomas desperately wanted to believe in again. Outside, snow continued softly falling, gently covering tracks and muffling sounds, a quiet comfort for Thomas and the animals who now made up his world. He glanced toward the window, aware that his neighbors remained unsure of his intentions, yet unable to find a way to bridge the divide that had grown between him and the community. Max stirred slightly, nudging his hand with quiet insistence, sensing Thomas's turmoil and quietly offering reassurance. Thomas sighed gently, grateful once again for this silent understanding. Their shared experiences bound them in ways words could not capture, the unspoken language of companionship forged by survival and healing. Looking at Max, Thomas saw reflections of himself, the soldier he had been, the man he hoped to become, and the friend whose loyalty had never faltered, no matter how deeply the wounds had cut. In this silent, shared warmth, Thomas felt a small measure of peace settle over him. They had survived war's harshest tests. Perhaps, in time, they might also find acceptance and understanding here, in the quiet haven of Clearwater. The quiet routine of Clearwater was unexpectedly broken. One crisp winter morning, when Officer Daniel Blake, a calm and fair-minded man in his mid-30s, with short brown hair and kind blue eyes, gently knocked at Thomas Miller's cabin door. Daniel was known for his careful approach to community concerns, especially ones involving animals. His presence usually brought a quiet reassurance, but today, uncertainty lingered behind his calm demeanor. Behind him stood Margaret Evans, the gentle veterinarian whose soft brown eyes held a compassionate apology she hoped Thomas might understand. Thomas opened the door slowly, a wary tension evident in his posture. Max, his ever-loyal German shepherd, stood silently at his side, ears alert, eyes watchful. Officer Blake offered a quiet greeting, explaining gently yet formally that the authorities had received complaints and needed to investigate their validity. Thomas nodded slowly, his heart heavy but understanding the necessity of transparency. Inside the cabin, the warmth was instantly noticeable, not merely from the steady fire burning quietly in the hearth, but from something less tangible, a sense of calm and security woven subtly into every detail. Margaret observed quietly as the other dogs gathered close to Thomas, each displaying a trust that spoke volumes beyond any words. Duke and Scout rested their heads gently upon his knees, their soft sable and black fur brushing against Thomas's scarred hands, as though silently assuring him of their faith in his innocence. Luna and Ranger stood quietly nearby, their gentle expressions radiating an unmistakable serenity, while young Bear wagged his tail tentatively, sensing the unusual tension yet trusting Thomas implicitly. Officer Blake took his time carefully surveying the cabin, his experienced eyes searching not for wrongdoing but for evidence of the truth, whether harsh or gentle. What he found was subtle yet profoundly moving. Carefully maintained bedding for each dog, toys neatly arranged, high-quality food carefully stored, and medicine meticulously organized. Each detail spoke not only of responsible care but also profound love. Margaret watched the scene quietly, her heart filling with both relief and sadness. Relief that no cruelty existed, yet sadness that Thomas had endured such quiet scrutiny. When Officer Blake finally spoke, his voice was filled with sincere respect. "Mr. Miller, it's clear you take exceptional care of these animals. Whatever suspicions arose, I assure you, they've been laid to rest today." Thomas nodded slowly, gratitude and quiet dignity mingling in his expression. Margaret stepped forward gently, her voice soft yet clear, filled with quiet empathy. "We're sorry for doubting you, Thomas. Sometimes people assume the worst, but your dogs, they tell a different story, one of loyalty and kindness. Outside, a few townspeople had gathered quietly, their faces uncertain yet curious. Linda Harris, the retired teacher who had passionately raised initial concerns, now stood silently, her expression deeply reflective. Jim Cooper, the mail carrier whose doubts had grown reluctantly over time, was also there, his broad shoulders hunched slightly with quiet regret. As Thomas stepped outside, Max followed close, his noble head held high. The townspeople watched silently as Officer Blake gently addressed them, affirming Thomas's innocence, explaining carefully and respectfully the depth of compassion and care he'd witnessed within the cabin walls. Linda's eyes filled quietly with remorse. She hadn't meant harm, but now saw clearly how assumptions had clouded truth. Jim nodded slowly, his rugged features softening as understanding gradually replaced suspicion. In the gentle silence that followed, Margaret took the opportunity to speak, her voice gentle but clear, carrying softly across the snowy clearing. Thomas and his dogs deserve our respect. They've all suffered greatly, but together they've healed one another. We owe them our compassion, not suspicion. Slowly, murmurs of quiet agreement rippled through the small crowd. Faces softened, and quiet apologies were exchanged, voices tentative yet sincere. Thomas stood quietly, a guarded yet hopeful expression softening the deep lines of his face. Max pressed closer, his warmth reassuring Thomas more eloquently than words ever could. Linda stepped forward carefully, her voice gentle and sincere. "Mr. Miller, we misunderstood you. Clearwater should have welcomed you openly. Instead, we let fear guide us. Please accept our apologies and let us try again." Thomas hesitated briefly, eyes glancing downward as emotions welled within him. But when he looked up, the guardedness had softened, replaced by cautious hope. "Everyone carries scars." He finally spoke softly, voice deep yet gentle. "Mine were just easier to see through my silence. Perhaps it's time we all tried a bit harder to understand one another." Margaret smiled warmly, sensing a fragile yet significant change in the quiet man standing before her. Clearwater had learned an important lesson that day, one of humility, understanding, and compassion. In the quiet strength of Thomas Miller and the silent devotion of his 7 German shepherds, the townspeople had glimpsed a truth powerful enough to change hearts and open minds, reminding them of the quiet yet profound dignity that could exist beneath any scars, visible or not. As spring gently swept away the last remnants of winter snow in Clearwater, a profound change blossomed within the community, inspired by a quiet yet powerful story. Thomas Miller, whose guarded heart had begun to open to the warmth of genuine acceptance, felt a quiet stirring of courage he hadn't experienced in years. Encouraged by the newfound compassion of his neighbors, Thomas accepted Margaret Evans' gentle invitation to speak openly at the town hall, a modest building with warm, wood-paneled walls that had witnessed generations of community gatherings. The townspeople arrived early, quietly eager, filling the seats with a respectful anticipation that spoke of newfound understanding and deep remorse for earlier misunderstandings. Thomas stood before them, his strong frame steady but his voice gentle, carrying the weight of past burdens. Beside him sat Max, the loyal German shepherd whose quiet dignity had never wavered, eyes warm and attentive. Thomas took a deep breath, slowly beginning to recount a story he'd never before shared openly, his voice initially cautious but steadily gathering strength with each honest word he spoke. He described in quiet detail the days spent in the scorching sands of Iraq, painting images of camaraderie among soldiers, friendships forged under unbearable pressure, and the profound bonds created between human and animal companions. He recalled vividly, though gently, the devastating night that had forever altered his life, not focusing on the violence but rather the humanity, the profound courage and sacrifice of friends lost. He spoke of the painful aftermath, the physical wounds that healed slowly, and deeper, invisible wounds he believed might never fade. As Thomas shared, Max remained quietly at his side, ears alert, eyes calm. Thomas rested a reassuring hand on Max's head, drawing quiet strength from the dog's unwavering presence. His story then shifted gently to the German shepherds themselves, those brave dogs whose courage had been tested beyond measure yet who, even in trauma, had offered unconditional trust and loyalty. Thomas described Max's gentle determination, Shadow's watchful eyes, Duke and Scout's inseparable bond, Luna's calm steadiness, Ranger's careful devotion, and Bear's youthful hopefulness. Each dog's personality wove gently into his narrative, illustrating not just their trauma but their profound resilience and unyielding ability to heal through unconditional love. Listening carefully in the audience, Margaret felt tears softly trailing down her cheeks. Beside her sat Linda Harris, the retired teacher whose eyes now held only gentle remorse and deep respect. Jim Cooper, the sturdy mail carrier, shifted quietly, understanding clearly now how his own assumptions had blinded him to the genuine quiet bravery Thomas embodied. Each listener found themselves reflecting not only on Thomas's journey, but also on their own quiet prejudices, realizing how swiftly misunderstanding could wound and how compassion could so profoundly heal. When Thomas finished speaking, silence filled the room briefly, a quiet, heavy pause as the community absorbed the heartfelt honesty they'd just witnessed. It was Linda who finally broke that silence, her gentle voice, sincere and emotional, quietly expressing the town's gratitude for Thomas's courage and forgiveness. Your story, Thomas, has shown us all something we desperately needed to see, how bravery can quietly exist in the simplest acts of compassion, and how healing often begins in shared honesty. From that moment forward, Clearwater began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. Thomas found himself greeted warmly during daily walks, neighbors now smiling genuinely, pausing briefly to share a quiet word or gentle gesture. Children carefully approached Max, whose gentle patience quickly made him their favorite companion, and Thomas, watching these quiet exchanges, found his heart softening in ways he hadn't believed possible. The 7 German shepherds, each beloved and cherished, now moved confidently through town, their disciplined calmness a gentle reminder of the quiet dignity possible even in healing wounds. Thomas soon opened his cabin doors more freely, inviting those who wished to learn more about the dogs or simply share in quiet companionship. Margaret became a regular visitor, her gentle compassion creating a quiet space of understanding where Thomas felt increasingly comfortable sharing the deeper truths of his journey. Linda Harris visited too, quietly apologetic yet eager to learn, and in her sincerity, Thomas found genuine forgiveness. As months passed, Clearwater became not just a place Thomas had settled, but truly his home, a place of shared healing, compassion, and mutual understanding. The scars of the past still lingered, quiet reminders of what had been endured, but in the gentle warmth of community, Thomas and his loyal companions found something even stronger, genuine peace and a quiet, lasting sense of belonging. In Clearwater's quiet evenings, as stars gently filled the sky, Thomas often found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. Beside him, Max's warm, steady presence silently affirmed the simple truth they had both learned deeply. Even from the darkest places, light would always quietly find its way home. Sometimes, life's greatest lessons come quietly from the gentlest souls. Thomas and his 7 loyal German shepherds taught Clearwater the true meaning of compassion, sacrifice, and unconditional loyalty, reminding us all that healing begins when we open our hearts to each other. If their story touched your heart, please consider subscribing and joining our journey, because every story shared is a step toward understanding, kindness, and a more compassionate world.